Hello, New Mexico, and welcome to another episode of Around the Roundhouse, a podcast featuring the policies, politics, and personalities of the land of enchantment. My name is Daniel Chacón, and I'm the State House reporter for the Santa Fe New Mexican. Our guest this week is State Representative Andrea Romero, a Santa Fe Democrat who has served in the legislature since 2019. Representative Romero was one of the architects of a proposal passed during the 30-day session to establish a truth commission to investigate allegations of crimes at Jeffrey Epstein's Zorro Ranch outside of Santa Fe. Her role in the fight for justice in New Mexico earned her an invitation to attend President Donald Trump's State of the Union address as a guest of Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury. Representative Romero joined over a dozen Epstein survivors who attended as guests of other Democratic members of Congress as part of a push to highlight the voices of survivors and those seeking justice and accountability in the Epstein case. Representative, thank you for being with us today. It's always awesome to see you.
Such a pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's been an exciting week.
I bet. But before we jump into the State of the Union, I thought that we could get started by you helping us understand why you pushed to establish a panel that would investigate Jeffrey Epstein's alleged crimes here in New Mexico.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's been a journey for me to really try to wrap my head around this very sprawling case regarding Jeffrey Epstein and the many perpetrators, I believe, surrounding him. I had come, I feel like, late to the story when it was to my attention that this was happening in our country and the world. It was around summertime that I really started hearing what was going on with the call for release of files for information. And they kept mentioning Santa Fe. They kept mentioning this ranch in our backyard. They kept saying he was here, he was in Santa Fe, and then nothing else. And then, of course, I just went on this real deep dive going, well, what do you mean? What else happened here? And you start to learn more about Manhattan, Florida, the island, and yet just nothing about what was going on here. And I started asking questions. I started asking folks around town, folks that were around the time that I knew he was coming here. At least the news had been reporting on that, and many different documentaries about folks visiting. And then, really coming to find out that there was never an investigation. There was never. So it just became so heavy on me that folks were alleging abuse here, and there was never a follow-up. So following those questions was really like, well, what can we do? The statutes of limitations have run in our state. These victims are begging for justice. And I really just started listening, and thus came the Truth Commission out of that, saying we need to find a way to get this on the record. As a student of international law and, ethnic violence, things that I had studied as an undergrad, were now starting to come to fruition as a way in which we could tell the truth and raise the voices of the folks who were involved in this.
And Representative, now that the commission has been established and in fact already held its first meeting, what happens next?
So there's a lot of course, just getting set up, just the logistics and administrative, background of that. What has already commenced is collaboration with our state attorney general's office. In the same week that we launched the Truth Commission, they relaunched a criminal investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. So we're looking for the there that may still be the sort of live wire of criminality. Meanwhile, while we've been getting intel, folks that have read the headlines, seen the facts that we're getting this afoot, have started to contact us, have started to say, I want to share my story. I have information. I don't know if it's helpful. It runs the entire gamut. And we're working with the Attorney General's office while they have this live investigation to help us understand what is a crime that they will be looking toward and looking into today, and then what gets handed over to our Truth Commission to build this story out over the 26 years that he was in New Mexico. So it's a lot. It's going to be a lot of legwork before our first reporting by July 31st. I think we'll have a lot to say before then. But our commission is already meeting regularly, speaking regularly about, how this is going to work. And we just finished our session. So bless our legislative council. They are, resting while also thinking, how can we help? So it's been a huge undertaking to even get to the beginning of this, but more to come.
I was going to ask you just that very question. Your first report is due by the end of July, your final report by the end of the year. Huge undertaking, lots of people, I'm sure, to interview, lots of documents to comb through. How are you going to get it done? You will help, correct?
Yes, we do have, we're able to hire staff, legal supports, folks that have done these types of investigations to help us build this case out. And, there are so many different threads. There are so many different potential crimes here that we want to be able to lay out in full and detail these stories. We have this deadline, but every day it seems like we're getting new information, and information is being provided in a more accessible way, even through the files. There's just internet sleuths everywhere. We're getting tips, etc. So, we're really trying to be clear about how we're going to build this and these different narratives that we need to look at, that the public need to know. And so for us, it's being really first responsive to the victims who are still out there. That's who this Truth Commission is for and was built for, and as a platform to tell their stories. And if there was a crime that was never investigated, or it's still a crime today, that's what we want to be able to share with the world.
On that point, you mentioned the statute of limitations, and I was curious,
Yeah.
is it possible that someone could be criminally charged given that, these allegations occurred so long ago?
So that's really the element of the legislative body being the purveyor of this Truth Commission. Our job as legislators is to not only platform the reality of what went on in New Mexico, it's also to dovetail the policies that need to be brought forth to bring justice for these victims. Yes, today in New Mexico, our statutes of limitations are quite short. We just increased the statute of limitations unlimitedly for second-degree sex offenders. But again, this is so arbitrary when we're talking about folks who have been subject to abuse. So we need to keep hearing these stories and understand where and how can we bring justice to the victims who are ready to come forward, ready to tell their stories when they're ready. The laws tend to be very arbitrary when we're talking about the suffering that so many have gone through. We need those laws to match up with justice. And that's what our Truth Commission will also recommend, is how to be able to, make sure that when our laws are not meeting that demand of justice, that we are able to readjust as needed.
Representative, tell us a little bit about the composition of the commission and who's on it and kind of what they bring to the table.
Yeah, one of the most remarkable things about when I started asking questions and then thinking about the makeup of the commission is that unanimously every person I spoke to was interested in helping. And so it's an incredible feat for us to know in New Mexico that when it comes to our humanity and the crimes that we never want to have happen, there's no semblance of Democrat or Republican. It's just about the work that we're doing. So our commission is made up of 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. So when we have to vote on a matter, it has to be unanimous for us to bring something forth to the public. And so the makeup of that are my 3 colleagues, Andrea Reeb, who's a prosecutor down south, who's been long in the justice system, who understands our systems of justice, has worked on a number of pieces of policy in this last session and previous sessions in that area of criminality, sex crimes, etc. So she really understands that space. So grateful to have her on the commission. Representative William Hall, who is a former FBI agent. He understands this space, had known about the history of Jeffrey Epstein in our country as well. So grateful to have his expertise and the lens of how to run an investigation, how to do what we're doing. He's, incredible at asking the right questions and being at the table when we, things that I don't know, he will know, et cetera. And then Representative Mariana Anaya, who has had a long history of working in helping victims of sex abuse and crimes and working with the advocacy groups who have worked to strengthen our laws, strengthen recovery for victims and the systems to help them guide through those challenging times. So I'm so grateful that, again, our legislature unanimously passed the resolution to get us there, because, again, we all agree that this should just never happen again in our state. And where I'm coming from is a legal lens. Again, I'm a student of justice in all forms internationally. How I was able to pull this together comes from my background as the sort of freedom fighting fierceness of justice for women, especially in these cases, but certainly all people who have been affected by these crimes.
Representative, among the many records related to Zorro Ranch was an email to FBI investigators noting an anonymous claim that the bodies of 2 girls were buried somewhere in the hills outside Zorro Ranch. Will the commission investigate those allegations?
Again, there's no statute of limitations in New Mexico on murder. And so this is my understanding as to why the criminal investigation was relaunched by the New Mexico Department of Justice, that this claim is enough to reopen that criminal case. And for us, we're not law enforcement. We are not investigating a live crime today. What we will do in collaboration with the Department of Justice is, when that investigation is likely to take place by them at Zorro Ranch, we will be on the record to be able to witness what went on, how it went on. The sort of bizarre thing of the timing for us to have gotten this Truth Commission up and running and then seeing all this information comes through seems uncanny. Honestly, I'm just so grateful that we had these sort of parallel lines on what we're trying to do. But nevertheless, yes, in collaboration with them, after their investigation is done, we will be able to understand what was going on and collaborate on releases of information to the public on what we find.
And Representative, given the ongoing DOJ investigation and the work of the commission, is there not some thinking that you all will be duplicating efforts?
So that's really where the collaboration is so important, is that when it comes to the resources that we have, they're always limited. In which case, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. If we have a witness coming in or a victim providing us testimony, that we're collaborating on questions to be asked, on lines of inquiry that we know we want to be able to follow through with, on perhaps different lenses of stories that we're hearing, but things that, again, are not beyond a reasonable doubt for the criminality elements of what the DOJ has to do. We can get things on the record, things that perhaps were reported to police but never investigated. Those are the things that we will want to be able to talk about and get on the record that the DOJ, that's not their lane, this is ours. So that collaboration is really critical and really part of how we're trying to get all of these elements together and work in concert with one another.
Representative, a number of high-profile Democrats, including former Governor Bill Richardson and former Attorney General Gary King, have been linked to Jeffrey Epstein. Was there ever pushback or concern that the work of the commission could potentially implicate your party?
Absolutely. I mean, this was part of the complexity of even getting to the point of talking about the commission. There are a lot of people with a lot of relationships in our state. Also, why I think we kept it in the House, and this is strategic, was that we didn't want to involve the larger body of politics, even in the Senate, because of those relationships, because we didn't want to compromise what we were trying to do in through this investigation to if there were going to be hurdles or if there was going to be closed doors to us, we were really fighting for that. And so, these are characters who, if they committed a crime, we will put them on the record. And for us, again, as a commission, this is not about politics. This is about bringing justice to survivors. What they have suffered is beyond political, affiliation. And that's for where we, have, in our sense of what we're trying to accomplish, is to make sure it never happens again, no matter who you are, no matter how powerful you think you are, that the rule of law should prevail. And so, yeah, for us, we're not playing political games here. I'm not trying to protect a predator. And I think that's really the clarity that we have all come together on.
Okay. Representative, the New Mexican reported this week that construction at the ranch by the current owner has been pulled back due to lack of permits. The state and county said the owners were constructing a gate without permission, but are investigating whether other construction has taken place. Are you worried that could affect your investigation?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when we're talking about a potential crime scene that never had an investigation, it's very critical that we know what changes were made, especially if we're trying to collaborate information from victims who may have suffered there and the walls have changed or the elements of what may have been may have shifted. And so it's really important for us to get some clarity on what changes have been undergone, especially if they went unpermitted. I mean, those are really big challenges for us as we, pursue the truth of what happened. And so we were asking the questions. In fact, this didn't even come about. Again, our collaborative effort, when Representative Hall said, we need to know if they've made things change because it's going to really potentially compromise our work. And again, that lens deeply helps us understand, okay, we're talking about a potential crime scene here. And so, yeah, it's a really important effort for us to be able to know what has happened since that ranch has been, if it's been tampered with.
Okay. Representative, let's turn a little bit to the State of the Union. Describe your reaction when you received an invitation from Congresswoman Stansbury to attend as her guest. It's kind of a big deal.
It was a huge honor to be even invited. And kind of, in the overwhelm of session ending, didn't really have a lot of time to process or think about it. I think I'll be doing that in the next few weeks, to be honest. Of course, just being able to accept the invitation is one thing. But the reality for me was really being able to connect with survivors before the State of the Union and knowing that they would be attending, hoping that somebody would acknowledge them in there. So for me, the real the power in that visit was being able to meet with survivors and tell, they knew about what we've been doing in New Mexico. It was so humbling to know that they had caught wind of what we were trying to build. And also terrifying to think that they have been begging for somebody to be hearing them for years, some decades. Some of these cases go back to the early 90s when they were reporting abuse. And to finally say, we're so grateful for your state and standing up for us. And that was just, made it all worth it for me but that was before even attending the State of the Union address, as to feel that sort of unity with what we're trying to accomplish. And of course, just the gravitas of knowing that what we're trying to put together, folks had already understood. And so, yeah, it was a very powerful moment. It's hard to not be really emotional about, what we're undertaking. But certainly it was really powerful to connect.
I was going to ask you about that, whether or not you had an opportunity to meet with any of the survivors. And I'm curious if any of them mentioned any kind of New Mexico connection.
Yes, they did. And the few conversations I was able to have, just because it was such a whirlwind of a day and there were lots of reporters wanting to speak to victims, but was able to make connections with them. They said among the things that were happening with Jeffrey Epstein and his whole operation in various states, that New Mexico was basically the worst. And I don't know what that means. Entirely right. We're in the process, and we've heard horrible things from different accounts. But the fact that this was never investigated, the fact that this was really pushed aside from all of the other investigations, just sets off alarm bells for so many. And they were just saying, thank you for finally telling the story, because, what you're going to find is it's not going to be easy. And so, for us and putting all of these stories together and understanding the victims involved, this is where the crux of what we're doing is so critical in getting the story straight. But I can already, just based on the testimony that I've had in these very short conversations, again, just connecting with people, that it seems very dark.
And Representative, just as a quick follow-up, were there survivors who stated that they had been at Zorro Ranch?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Representative, President Trump made no mention of the Epstein scandal during the State of the State. I don't know if that came as a surprise or not a surprise to you.
Well, it was, and, I've worked so hard to make this nonpartisan, but to hear a speech as a Democrat like that, and just the broad spectrum of the spectacle that it was, without really looking to what I think Americans really care about and just brushing over that, it was really difficult. And for the folks in the crowd that were waiting for acknowledgement, again, that they've been asking this administration to recognize that as they've been releasing files, that there's so much information still not being released. We kept hearing there's over 3 million files still to be released, over half of the documentation that folks knew their stories were in there, and they have not been told to the public yet. Victims that have just continued to come forward month after month, some that just as recent as November started in their fight for this, to hear their voices heard, get their voices heard. It's so difficult to see them stare in the face of folks who are supposedly trying to help them and are not. And that's what's just so clear to me, with really the congressional House pushing forward on getting the answers that they need. And again, they will also be helping us with the redactions on documents if we cannot get an answer from this federal government. So yeah, I mean, it's truly, to the highest echelons of power when it comes to our justice system that have so mishandled the situation.
Congresswoman Stansbury has referred to the Epstein case as she's accused the White House of a massive cover-up. Do you agree with that characterization?
It's so hard to not think that there's just something happening when you can't get even, the Department of Justice to follow the law. You can come up with a million reasons why that is. So yeah, the feelings of a cover up or something deeper or something dubious, can just continue to snowball when we're not getting the answers that we both deserve and need in order to rule that out. If it's not a cover up, then what is it? What is it that's holding us from the information that we are all seeking out right now? We have not heard the story. That's why New Mexico has to tell this story. The fact that we're even in a position where something was going on for decades and nothing happened, then what is it? If it's not a cover up, what is it? And that's where I'm coming from is, it's hard to rule out any of these conspiracies, any of these, situations when we're not getting the answers that we need.
Okay. Representative, we both mentioned the end of the 30-day session, and hopefully you've gotten a little bit of rest. And while you did have success, obviously, with the establishment of the Truth Commission, you were also involved with other high-profile pieces of legislation. They were somewhat contentious as well, or these were anyway. The Clear Horizons Act and a ban on the sale of certain semi-automatic weapons, which didn't make it across the finish line. Why do you think they failed, and will they be reintroduced?
Yeah, lots of speculation as to why and what folks were ready and prepared for. On Clear Horizons, it's the world needing to do more on climate. It's really truly the fact that we have to take responsibility as a state while we're still in the extractive space in oil and gas to acknowledge that, yes, this has been a huge boom for our state and our ability to diversify, to prop up early childhood education, universal childcare, all of these things that we're celebrating as New Mexicans, while also needing to hold ourselves accountable. And at minimum, Clear Horizons is getting us to the Paris Agreement that our country was a part of for so long, holding oil and gas accountable to their emissions. We're paying for that as a state. And it's like, look away. If you're a polluter, you should be paying in our state. And that for me is why I was a co-sponsor. But asking, the biggest industry in the state to now take a pay cut because we're asking them to pay for that. We're asking them to be accountable to that. Not everybody was on board, and certainly not the Senate. We didn't even get a crack at it in the House, unfortunately. So yeah, lots of feelings about that, how it is that we can move that forward. And again, these are promises that we made as a nation long before this administration when it comes to the Paris Agreement and other agreements that were made. And then on gun safety, my very first election ran as the first candidate that had, a candidate not sponsored by, but endorsed by, folks that were asking for us to have stronger gun safety laws. This was at the time of post Sandy Hook, then Marjorie Taylor Douglas I'm sorry, I'm getting all of my names mixed up, but in Florida, the Douglas High School that had been, just basically terrorized children. And since that time, students have come to me year after year after year asking to be safe in school. I was a victim of gun violence at the age of 18. Just at a concert in Albuquerque, a gunman sprayed bullets into a crowd of people following that show. And I had to treat a classmate of mine at age, he was 16 years old, who had been hit by bullets, just indiscriminate bullets, and crowds of people waiting for ambulances and treating people in the street. And that wasn't even in the news that night, so because nobody died. And these are horrifying situations that kids are faced with every day growing up in gun violence. And for me, it's that fight. It's how to have gun sensibility, safety around these things. And for our bill, it was what guns should just not exist in our society when it comes to those things that have been designed for war, who have been designed to destroy human life at a rate that is impossible to combat against. And those were the guns we were trying to regulate. And say they should no longer be for sale in our country. They were banned for a decade from 94 to 2004. And we've just been on this, sort of NRA tirade since then, in my opinion, ravaging our country. So yeah, this is a way our state can take ownership of these issues and try to make our communities safer. And we're just seeing more and more and more that these guns are being used in the commission of a crime. There was just a young man this week, put into prison for over 18 years for using a type of weapon like this and ravaging Las Cruces Park and injuring over 14 people. That's how fast these weapons operate. So lots to say about why we're doing that. And, so grateful for our community really supporting and leading that effort. We've just really trying to help people understand what gun violence has really done to our community and to do everything we can to combat that.
Representative, we mentioned Congresswoman Stansbury earlier. She was once a member of the House of Representatives here in New Mexico, and she's now really a well-known name in the halls of Congress. Which leads me to ask, what are your political aspirations?
Well, first, let me just say I entered the House with Congresswoman Stansbury, and I am so dang proud of her and so proud of her representation of us in the halls of Congress. And one of the great things I got to see while in DC for the State of the Union was just how well respected our congressional delegation is across every walk of life in that building, and just how much love they have for our representation in New Mexico. Feel really good about that. I'm running for reelection in the House, so that's my aspirations. I love this work so much. It's been remarkable to be able to continue to grow in this space and continue to fight for the things that we know every single year we're continuing to make better, and continue to have hard conversations. I love that. I feel like it's the greatest thing I've ever done. And so for me, it's being able to be in these moments of doing what we can to make it as best as we can while we have the time. And so it's been, for me, an amazing journey. And so another couple years in the House, amazing. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Representative, for spending time with us. We really appreciate your perspective and learning a little bit more about the Truth Commission and your work as a lawmaker. And as always, thank you to our viewers and listeners for tuning into Around the Roundhouse. Join us every week as we talk to newsmakers in the political realm by subscribing to our podcast through Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. For the latest developments, including our ongoing coverage of Jeffrey Epstein's ties to New Mexico, follow our coverage online at santafenewmexican.com, where you can also subscribe to our political newsletter, The Roundhouse Report. Until next time, I'm Daniel Chacón, and this has been Around the Roundhouse.